Welcome to the Golden Shadow. My name is Arran Rogerson.
And I'm Alyssa Polizzi.
And so we already recorded this entire episode.
We were like 25 minutes in.
25 minutes in, but we were planning on doing a half an hour episode. But we realized, basically at the end, that Alyssa's voice was not being recorded, despite the monitor being on. So it sounded like we were recording, but we actually weren't. Essentially, and even before that, in the previous intro we recorded, we were commenting that Alyssa didn't know what to say at the intro. I said, "Welcome to the Golden Shadow. My name is Arran Rogerson." And then there was just a pause. And she's like, "What do I say again?" It's like, you say your name. What do you mean?
I know. It's not like I didn't know my name. It was like, how do I say it? Do I say, and my name is Alyssa Polizzi? And I just my brain is not working right now.
Right. And then we thought about it for a while. And it was like, you say, and I'm Alyssa Polizzi. And like, okay, got it. And then we tried recording again. And then I messed up the intro. And I said, "Welcome to the Golden Shadow. And I'm Arran Rogerson." And that was like, that's not what I said. Anyways, the point is, we're very scattered and distracted. We've also been really stressed out in a pretty intense way. Probably more stressed out than I feel like I've been in a very, very long time. Because it was very acute stress, which was unusual for me. But that's all because we moved out of state. If you've been listening to the podcast, you might, maybe I don't even know if we've really mentioned it that much, but you might be familiar with us living in the Bay Area of California. And at the end of last month, we packed up and we moved out into the desert, and we are in mountain time now.
I feel like I have these thoughts from just when we were just previously recording. It's like, should I say this again?
Yes.
Kind of feels contrived.
It feels contrived. It feels awkward because it feels almost like you're following the script now. It's like, I already said this, but I guess I'll say it again. So it doesn't feel quite as natural.
It doesn't feel as natural, but I'm going to say it again. I'm really excited to be living in Mountain Standard Time. I don't know why exactly. I think just even this, the way it's being like juxtaposed in my mind of being in the mountains effectively is just something that feels like a long time coming. And I didn't really get into this when we were just recording, but when I was younger, my parents used to take me up to Twain Harte in California, where my stepmom had a cabin. And
kind of in the foothills of the Sierras.
Yeah, the foothills of the Sierras. And at a really, really young age, like 8 years old, I just really fell in love with being in the mountains. There was always this feeling like I belong here. I wish that one day I can feel like I live in the mountains. And so I think even having this idea of being in mountain time, even though I don't live in the foothills of the Sierras, still feels like something is being achieved for me.
Yeah, I agree. There's something very romantic about mountain time and the feeling that you live sort of in the, I wouldn't say the middle of the country because that's not very romantic usually when we say that, but the idea of living in the mountains of the United States is something that's, also called to me for a while. And it's funny when you're essentially as far west as you can go. I mean, it makes sense that going a little bit east kind of calls to you. It's like going someplace new.
Yeah.
But it's also just coming close to nature, coming closer to nature. And we both went camping as children. Well, maybe you didn't really.
No, I did.
You did, okay. But I went camping a lot. I went camping every summer, and that was a regular thing for my family. And like, where did we go when we camped? It's like we always went east into Nevada and Utah and Arizona and Wyoming. And so there's an association of like going back to nature. It involves heading east, heading away from the coast and going towards mountain time.
Interesting.
So there's definitely that association for me.
Yeah, so it brings some of that kind of like childlike wonder to it.
Totally.
Earlier you mentioned being as like far west as you can be, which for us, we like literally lived on the coast in California.
Yeah.
And it brought up for me that when I was younger, I moved to California.
Yeah.
But I moved from being like as far east as you could be, which was on an island in New York, Staten Island.
Staten Island.
And I moved from like being nearly as far east as you could be to being as far west as you could be. And there's always been this interesting sort of like shadow of one life that kind of replicated another life, you know, like being very, very far east, or even just being in like New York and then California, which I think always sort of play an interesting dynamic between the two states.
Yeah.
And this change of moving a bit more east, but definitely not as far east as I used to live, has this whole new sense of kind of possibility and wonder. And I don't know, it feels right to me because I really wouldn't want to go back home to the East Coast. It doesn't really feel.
Yeah. That doesn't sound very appealing to me.
No.
Not to bash the East Coast or to bash New York, but I wouldn't want to live there.
Yeah. It's interesting because my younger brother has gone back to live in New York, and he's in California right now. But you know, at times when I've gone to visit him, and he's living in Brooklyn, or at times he's living in Manhattan, and it makes me like project all of these possibilities of what my life might have been like if I had stayed in New York. And there's it's not necessarily something that I feel like fits me any longer. But if you had asked me at a much younger age, you know, I wouldn't have wanted to have left and to have created a new life in California. But now I feel so deeply changed that kind of going back to especially just like, you know, the boroughs of New York is something that feels just a little overwhelming to me, a little bit too intense. And that I need to be in a place that feels a little bit connected, a little bit more connected to nature, a little bit slower, a little bit quieter.
Yeah. So this episode is a bit of an update. This isn't a typical episode. We're not really diving into any like abstract topic very deeply. This is a bit of an update, but we also, you know, are going to explore this idea of home and leaving home and what that means. And so, home is archetypal. I think you could say. I think the whole sense of home is something that everyone feels strongly, whether they have it or whether they're longing for it, or whether they no longer feel at home where they are. This word home is something that I think strikes a pretty deep emotional chord for most people. And I think that in many ways, everyone is always seeking to somehow return home or find a new home. There's something very romantic about it, something very dramatic about it. There's that longing. And home, if we really, you know, try to explore what home means, it's not necessarily just a material place or a location. Home can be with a community. It can be with a specific relationship that you have. It could be some realm of activity that you feel at home. Maybe you feel really at home on the internet, playing video games with other people that you know on the internet. Maybe you feel at home on the soccer field. If you're a soccer player, you feel like that's the place where you can thrive and you're familiar and all your instincts make sense. And there's a sense of balance and homeostasis that's associated with home. The place where you can rest, the place where you can be safe, the place where you keep all your items, maybe the place where you can heal. And it's not always that idea, that archetype of home, of a place where you can rest or heal, is not always what literally home means to people. A lot of people have broken homes. A lot of people are have a home that doesn't feel like home, for instance, and that's a pretty complicated thing.
Well, and deeply destabilizing, right? not even just the sense that the home is an unsafe place, but that when we don't have that environment where I think we can return to and feel at ease in and feel just in flow with, in communion with, it does something just really destabilizing to an individual,
Yeah.
to one's psyche, to one's spirit, and it's there's a lot to go into with that.
Yeah,
I
of
just
course.
feel like, oh man. But at the same time, what does that spur an individual to do to adapt or to shift and shape or to leave this place that should be quote unquote home to establish something that really is? Or do you go deeper into yourself and find a home there? You know, like there's all these different ways in which we, as these like human adaptable creatures, find home in something
Right.
on the sports field, as you said, with your friends, you know, in an activity inside of yourself,
Yeah.
maybe actually with your family. There's a deep archetypal need for home to be present with us in some form. And what do we do when home stops feeling like home? You know,
Right.
we can't, to stay in that really, I think, is to, I don't know, to sort of force ourselves to be in a place where we will not really thrive. And that kind of poses the question, do we then have the courage to leave this place? Even if it feels uncomfortable, it's known.
Yeah.
And even that makes it scary to walk away from. And that's kind of the big leap that we have to take when we decide to shift and kind of throw things into this more chaotic realm of uprooting and
Right.
deciding to find something new.
Right. So there's always a tension here between staying put where you are and leaving to find someplace new. And again, this is multi-layered. There's all these different ways you could be doing this. If you're going to explore, you are essentially leaving the known to dive into the unknown. And that in many ways is like leaving home. And that might be in a very literal, mundane sense where you like are like actually moving away from your childhood home to go to college. It could be that you're leaving your job to explore a new path. You're kind of like leaving what's safe and known in order to hopefully arrive someplace better or achieve something that you want to achieve. And so if you feel as if your home, your literal home, or let's say the place that you find yourself, if you feel like that place no longer feels like home, if you can, and you have the courage to do it, usually you will leave to find a new home and to find a place that is more like this archetypal home, the place that feels safe, the place that feels like a place of healing, of rest, of the place you can always come back to recharge. You want to go find that. And that's, I think, why we've left the Bay Area and have come here is in many ways, the Bay Area has been my home for my entire life, essentially. I've always lived in Northern California, more or less. I've traveled a lot, but I've always lived in the Bay Area, really. And I can say that in many ways in the last few years that like the Bay Area kind of stopped feeling like home to me. And it's like, well, what does that mean? It's where you grew up. It's where you're from. It's you know all these people. What does it mean to say this place doesn't feel like home anymore? And that's a weird question. And it gets into a deeper sort of spiritual version of home, which is like, this is not a place where I feel rested. It's not a place where I feel like I can heal. It's not a place that feels empowering, or it feels like it's affording me to be the person I feel like I am, or to sink roots deep and build something in all these ways. It's like, I feel like I can't build anything. I feel like I'm getting tired. I feel like I'm not healing. I feel like I'm being wounded. I'm withering. I'm falling apart. That sounds kind of extreme. And that's not, I mean, it's not that extreme, I would say, but still there's a truth to it.
You're bringing up a point that I think a lot of people who have lived in the Bay Area might be able to relate to, which is that there is a absolutely known phenomena of how the Bay Area has changed, and it's become more and more difficult to live there. And as things become unviable, what do you do?
Right.
If I can't sink roots in here because the land has become too expensive
Right.
to live on,
Yeah.
and it's become overcrowded in some ways, or it's just driving you out,
Yeah.
and just the general energy of everyone just like struggling to get by. I mean, that's not the only reason why we've left, but it's certainly a huge part of it.
Well, it's all connected. You'd almost say
Yeah.
I feel like you could almost argue that the fact that it's become so expensive there to live
Yeah.
has driven many of the other things that became difficult for us.
Yes.
Because
That's
if it
yes.
was a cheap place to live, there's a lot of freedom in that.
Yeah.
And maybe your living situation, for instance, is something that you can actually change because you can afford to. Or maybe you're in a situation where you can't afford to change the living situation, and so you're kind of in this place that is changing, but you can't adapt to the change.
Yeah.
You're just sort of stuck, and you're suddenly like in a vice that's squeezing you.
Or even when you think about what your future could be, it's
Yeah.
like, how difficult is it going to be able to buy a house
Yeah.
and to start a family,
Yeah.
to do the normal things that adults do as
Yeah.
they just deeper in their maturity and they become more independent.
Right.
All of those things are so much more difficult in California. And we've seen the mass exodus that is happening really ever since COVID really hit, because I think that's basically
Certainly.
really posed an interesting question to a lot of young people,
Yeah.
which is that now that you don't have to, travel to the city to work, and you can either like work from anywhere, or maybe you even lost your job,
Yeah.
why stay here?
Yeah.
And for us, we are from California, so we still have roots and community and friends, but at the same time, where things are presently just is not workable.
Right.
And we can leave. We can work from home.
Yeah.
So we're jumping on an interesting opportunity that's been offered to us.
Yeah. Can work from home in quotations, 'cause we'll see about that. There's still some hurdles to leap over to get there, I'd say. But
Yeah,
for now, I mean, we definitely were not. We didn't have to be anywhere before when we were in the Bay Area. We weren't traveling back and forth to any job. So it's like whatever we were doing in the Bay Area before, we can still do it here.
Yeah.
And so that's why we sort of made well, there's a lot of reasons. The difficult, painful leap to this new place.
Yes,
seemed like it
there's
made
lots
sense.
of pros and cons.
Yeah.
But ultimately, there was a lot of very serendipitous, synchronistic events that took place where this
Right.
opportunity arose.
Right.
And
It makes you pay attention when there's like synchronous things happening where it's like, that seems like a weird coincidence.
yes,
Okay.
check out our episode on synchronicity
Right. Yeah.
for more insight into that felt sense of, whoa, something's grabbing your attention.
Right.
And I
It's
think
like, it seems like the cosmos is trying to tell me something. And I think I should pay attention.
Yeah. So I think that was part of what really pushed us into this big sort of courageous leap to face sort of the uncertainties that this kind of change brings, really, and allows us to kind of step into that role of the hero, you might say, that kind of mythological role of leaving home
Right.
and leaving the known world.
Right.
But at the same time, knowing that there is this unfolding journey that's happening at this time, and there's going to be challenges and beasts to slay and transformation that is promised on the horizon. But also, I think a feeling, at least personally, of like that there will be a return home, and hopefully you will be stronger and more evolved when that happens.
Yeah. So, yeah, this tension between staying put and leaving. There's pros and cons of each, and you might be staying put for good reasons, or you might be staying put for bad reasons, and you might be leaving for good reasons, or you might be leaving for bad reasons. And it's not always clear which is always a mix of both. Obviously, it's not black and white, but our culture, at least amongst young people, but just generally our culture, I would say, is much, much more transient than I feel like any culture has ever been in the past. A lot of that has to do with just the affordances that technology and wealth gives you, which is like you can fly around and travel the world if you want. You can move from Seattle to New York if you want, and you can move to Austin 2 years later if you want, and people do that. And there's a lot of growth to be had from leaving and moving and being sort of on the road constantly, because there's all kinds of experiences. There's all kinds of unexplored territory that you explore. You are mapping out the world. You're mapping out yourself in all these new ways, because all these new experiences force you to do that. And so there's a lot of pros with going on that like heroic journey of taking that leap constantly, of having to meet new people, of having to rebuild your home repeatedly. But at the same time, there's a lot of pathology that comes with that. And I think that way too many young people, for instance, are too transient. They don't have roots. They move places for work, but like don't move places for community or family. And so they become sort of isolated people, and the culture becomes atomized for all kinds of reasons. But I would say one of the reasons is because people can move around so much that people inevitably isolate themselves from each other instead of forming really tight-knit communities and families in one spot. And that's part of the pro of staying put is you can't sink roots if you're moving constantly. You can't build anything if you're not staying put. You cannot plant a seed and have it grow without having that seed stay put in one patch of soil. So there's a lot of beauty and a lot of growth to be had with staying in one place. Forcing yourself to adapt to one environment and any changes that come with. If you're in the Bay Area and it's getting more expensive and you're forced to adapt to that, that can be growth. It could be. If you have to be in one community of people or one family of people and you have to adapt to all these different personalities and actually develop these relationships that will last years and years and years that are difficult. It's really difficult to do that. It's difficult to remain, for instance, in one romantic relationship for 10 years. That's more difficult than hopping to a new romantic relationship every 6 months. It's like, oh, this is inconvenient for me. I'm leaving now. Bye. So it's hard to say which is which with the pros and cons of leaving and staying put. It just depends.
It's just obviously like a case by case basis, and just all the things you're saying for me brings up a lot of my own, not necessarily like my personal history, but like my family's personal history.
Right.
We mentioned earlier that I'm from New York and all my family's in New York. And for my parents, they felt that staying in their community with their family was just not workable anymore.
Right.
And not only not workable, but also like not healthy, not conducive to their well-being. And the kind of change that they made ultimately was one that was like pretty radical, pretty extreme. I think initially my parents were like, yeah, we should move out of Staten Island. Maybe we'll move to New Jersey. Maybe we'll move to Pennsylvania. And then something synchronistic, serendipitous happened that took them all the way to California.
Right.
And like radically changed their lives and their children's lives.
And I bet the family back in New York disapproved,
right?
Oh,
yes.
Because the culture, and this is more of a traditional culture, is like you stay put. You stay put.
Yeah.
Family is family.
Yes.
You just stay in this tight-knit unit, and you don't mingle with other cultures, maybe even.
Oh, barely. Yes.
And you might say, well, that's totally pathological. And it's like, well, it can be.
It can be.
But also, there's something beautiful that comes with having to stay put and having to adjust your family and make it work. And there's so much beauty that a lot of people never experience that comes with a multi-generational community.
Yes.
Your grandparents. Your grandparents get to raise their great-grandchildren. All your cousins and your brothers and sisters are all around you. There's something very powerful there that, like, for me, I will never experience. I never have.
Yeah.
I don't have roots in a familial or cultural way, right? I only have these sort of literal roots that come from, literal roots, that's wrong. I don't have literal roots. Anyways, the point I'm making is sometimes it's a good thing to stay put in the traditional cultures. They make sense in a lot of ways to do that. But for your parents, I would
Yeah.
say it made sense for them to leave
Yeah.
because staying put was not good. It wasn't helping
Yeah.
them.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
they
yeah.
were suffocating in many ways.
Yes. And, you know, I really respect their choice and how difficult it was. Just knowing how traditional and strong like New York Italian culture, my family culture was,
Yeah.
like that's a big, bold move that people are going to take a pretty big offense to.
Yeah.
And there is this huge loss that comes with it because for as much as the family is driving you crazy and you need to get away, at the same time, there's that same intensity of like love and connection. And, you know, I was just talking to my mom the other day and her brother called on the phone and it was just, I could still see how strong their love is and how strong their connection is. And I know how painful it is for her to not be with him.
Yeah.
But at the same time, she knew that she had to make this choice. And even for me as a young child, I felt that loss of my family who were like everything to me, you know, like my aunts and uncles and cousins were over all the time.
Yeah.
You know, we were always having family dinners, big family parties.
Yeah.
It went from this very vibrant, lively, colorful life to something that felt really hollow. And I still feel the echoes of that loss to this day. But at the same time, the person I've become because of that change is, I don't know, who would I be if my parents hadn't done that? And I respect and appreciate what they did and what opportunities that offered us, how
Yeah.
that helped me grow and expand and change. And I think that there are just times when you really realize that you have outgrown home. But hopefully you still connect to it in some way. You still foster it in some way, that you
Yeah.
just haven't cut it off and thrown it aside. And I think that that's what I do appreciate about what my parents did, is that I still felt connected. I still went and visited.
Yeah.
You know, I still had that connection to my family, but at times life really sort of throws you those curveballs, or those opportunities arise and you really feel like you've got to make that leap.
Yeah. So where we were, well, I would say like in the last year, but it's really more than that. I'd say the last several years, and both of us for different reasons. You know, we arrived at a place where I think we both felt as if we were sort of slowly dying, slowly withering away, kind of falling apart, like not really getting much rest, not really making much progress, kind of treading water. And treading water in a way where, you know, it's like, I feel like if I don't get out of this water, I'm going to drown.
Yeah.
And it's not perfect. There's pros and cons of the fact that we left. And I don't feel great about it. There's a lot of pain that comes with leaving, but ultimately we were in a situation where like it felt like this isn't really home anymore. Or if it is home, it's only partially home. And I need to find a new place that I can call home, where I can make progress, where I can heal, where I can rest, where I can breathe a little bit and hopefully explore who I think I'm meant to be. And that involved leaving.
Yeah.
And it's not a victorious, like, woohoo, like we're getting out of here. It's complicated, but I think that many people, and people who are listening right now, will arrive at some point in their life, and probably already have many times, where you have to move on.
Yeah.
And it's hard to say whether it's the right move or the wrong move. Many people decide to move on in ways that I think are kind of superficial and shallow, and they just remain in a superficial and shallow place in their entire life because they're so transient, because you can't build anything, you can't sink any roots.
Yeah.
But sometimes those roots have become corrupted and diseased, and you need to cut them off, and you need to move on and explore a new place and take that leap. And it's not always going to work out for the best, but usually it does. I feel like if you have the courage to make a change in your life, to go someplace, because you feel like you are not growing, usually it's a good thing.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not that step is not the right choice. Maybe you quit your job for a new path, and like that path didn't work, and you go back to the old job, but you gain something when you make that wave.
Yeah.
You learn something when you've fallen off that cliff, as the fool does, you might say.
Yeah.
And we're hoping that with this move that there's progress to be made here, but we don't know.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Well, I think just the change of location and the change of landscape is something that's going to be really revitalizing. And I mean, I think we both experience that, even like if you just go like camping for a few days or go backpacking.
Yeah, I went backpacking in the summer, and I just felt like it revolutionized my state of mind, basically.
Yeah. So there's something really to be said about shaking things up and being in a new place, especially when it's a landscape and environment that you want to be in, like not just like moving from like somewhere pretty nice to like, you know, some crappy city that you don't actually want to be in. It's like we want to be here, and the land is beautiful, and that aesthetic quality of the desert is something that's very enchanting and fascinating, and I think something that's called to both of us in really interesting ways.
Yeah.
And I feel really good about leaving the Bay Area, which to me I've always strongly associated with the coast and being right next to the ocean, especially like living on an island. I always feel like there's something in me that needs that anchoring of some part of nature that makes me feel small.
Yeah.
That like relativizes me. It reminds me of how unimportant I am in the grand scheme of things. And so like sitting just on the beach and watching the flow of the waves, it, to me, is not only grounding, but also, I don't know, it takes me out of myself.
Yeah.
And moving kind of into the desert, into a place of beauty, but a different type of beauty, a different type of land, has a similar effect. And it feels really good to be in this place for that reason, to be among the mountains and the trees and the desert air.
Yeah. We should do a different episode on nature. But it's true. The desert, if you haven't spent much time in the desert, and you know, maybe some of you listening really have no opportunity to go to the desert because not everyone lives near one, but the desert is sort of counterintuitive. It can seem sort of barren and ugly almost, because it just seems like a place of like death, or like it's like dry and maybe there's not much to see. But it's the desert is subtle, and the vacuum of the desert, the nothingness, the silence, the openness, how big the sky is when you're in the desert. It's something very, very powerful and very spiritual. And we don't get to experience the absence of things enough in our modern world, especially if you live in the city. The absence of sound, the absence of light, being someplace where you hear nothing and you can see the stars like very vividly. You look all around you and there's just nothing. There's something about that, as you said, that I do think reminds you of how small you are.
Yeah.
Because the universe actually is mostly empty. It is mostly dark. It is mostly nothing. The desert actually can help you feel that in a way that I think is really powerful, really spiritual.
And there's something just about standing in land that feels bigger and, as you said, more expansive, but also at that same time has less than what you're used to.
Yeah.
You're like less light. We're talking about light pollution, you know, so there aren't, street lights all over where we live now. In fact, like it's pretty dark at night. And so you can go out and actually like see the Milky Way and, the shapes of the formations around here in the mountains like take on this beautiful quality at night. And it's nice to see that instead of skyscrapers in the distance. Yeah. It feels good.
Yeah. I mean, you might love the city, and we're not going to try and tell you you're wrong. Like,
oh, no.
But nature, it's just hard to beat. And it is unfortunate how absent nature is from a lot of people's lives. And they don't even know what they're missing.
Yeah.
And with the desert, there is like a less is more experience that is like, again, like subtle, counterintuitive, but I feel really excited. I feel really happy to be here. It's been difficult to get the space to feel that because I feel like we've been so frantic and stressed out and trying to get things set up. And, when you move out of state, it's the way it is. It's hard to move out of state unless you just have no possessions and you just fly to where you're going. But if you have anything that you own, and you probably do, and if you have a lot of like equipment like I do, you can't just take a plane to where you want to go. So it's been difficult, but
it's been a journey.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of when I moved from the East Coast. We drove, took a week.
Yeah.
But it was, in retrospect, it's like pretty amazing to have done that. I remember driving through Wyoming and seeing snow and buffalo. And I was on the floor a lot because my dog would like stretch out and like push me off the seat. And, maybe we'll look back and kind of see like, okay, it took us 2 days to get over here. We camped and we had some challenges, but it's all part of that grand journey, of moving through these changes and then arriving and feeling like you need to sort things out and adjust and acclimate to the new place that you're in. And right now I think we both feel pretty like out of it and scattered, but at the same time there's that promise of all this newness that's opening itself to us, and I feel excited too. Yeah, so we're hoping that this will have a serious positive effect on our emotional states and our work. If the podcast improves drastically, you know why. But yeah, this is sort of an update episode. Not going to be as long as normal. Yeah. We appreciate you tuning in, and I think we'll be back to our regular programming next week. Do you have a question for us? Do you have a dream you'd like us to analyze? Is there a topic you'd like us to cover? We want to hear from you. Contact us through the submission form, which can be found at our Instagram page at Golden Shadow Podcast. Or if you're listening on YouTube, you can find the link in the description down below.
Thanks for listening.
See you later.
If you find this podcast useful, please consider supporting us on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/Golden Shadow Podcast. Thank you.